Polly, today is going to be quite interesting. We have video game intervention founder of Play to Prevent, Lynn Fiellin, Dr. Lynn Fiellin, coming from Yale University, going to be our guest.
Nice. What's she pitching to us?
So she's the founder of Play to Prevent, and I only have the blanket version. I'm sure she'll get far more in depth, but these are video games that they've created that are prevention based, which is something that I rarely hear about when I'm hearing about video games. I hear about, kids get this from this video game, they learn that from that video game, but I never really hear about the prevention video game. So I'm really, really curious about this.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. What ages does it go to?
So I believe it goes from age 10 up to about 18, or maybe it might exceed a little higher than that. But it's something I think, I have gamers at home, and I'm just really intrigued by this, really interested in what a prevention game actually looks like.
Yeah, I am too. You've got younger gamers, I've got older gamers. Maybe we should put them in a little test study.
Exactly. Let's see if these games really work.
Right, yes.
So, I'm curious to see what they're like, what they're about, if youth are even involved, because, a lot of times, a lot of these things come out and
adults think they know best.
Exactly.
Yep.
So, are they playable games? We'll see.
We'll see.
All right. And without further ado, today with us, we have Lynn Fiellin of Play to Prevent. How are you doing today, Lynn?
I'm good. It's great to be with both of you.
Now, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I didn't do your title any justice, but can you please give us your complete title and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, happy to. So my name is Lynn Fiellin. I'm a professor of medicine, the Child Study Center, and the School of Public Health at Yale. I am also founding director of the Play to Prevent Lab, which is also at Yale, and newly founder of Playbl, which is the entity that distributes our video game interventions. I am also the mother of 3 children who have taught me a lot about the subject area that our games focus on. So I give them full credit in terms of not only being the inspiration, but also the education I needed to do this work.
That's great. That's great. I didn't know that.
New news.
Exclusive.
I find kids are very helpful. They let you know what's lame or what's cool, or what you hear is true, whether it's really true or not, and what's going on. So
absolutely, they are the best source of what's authentic and real to them. So we follow their lead.
Yeah, definitely. Shout out to the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us how Play to Prevent came about?
Sure. So actually, we just celebrated 13 years with the lab this fall.
Congratulations.
And thank you. And as I mentioned, at the time, my husband and I have a blended family. So we have 5 kids between us. And at the time, they were between the ages of 9 and 19. And everybody was playing something. Everybody was playing a game, was on a computer or a console or what have you. And it just occurred to me that this was a great way to find them where they want to be, and give them a dose of something healthy. And so since video games really seem to be a major player on the landscape, I submitted a grant to the National Institutes of Health to proposing to develop and evaluate a video game intervention focused on risk reduction and HIV prevention in young teens. And hallelujah, it was funded off the bat, and that gave us 5 years of funding. And that's when I created the lab, because I knew I needed to have this infrastructure that would include content experts, community partners, game developers, and sort of be the house that we would all live in to do this work. So Play to Prevent was created in 2009. And since then, we have had both NIH as well as foundation funding, and I've just completed, about a year ago, completed a development on our last of 5 games. So we've it's been a great adventure, and really have been able to work closely with the community and with teens to develop and evaluate these games.
Wow. We hear so much about how video games influence this and influence that. It's always, well, not always, but a majority of the time it's pretty negative, but here we are.
Right. And this is
Something
really
very positive.
taking advantage of a delivery mechanism, again, where people want to be. People like playing games, people like playing video games, and we've just turned it around to include the content, the knowledge, the skill building to help them make healthier decisions, understand what their decisions can mean in terms of consequences. And since we work with commercial game developers, they make them fun and engaging, and kids kind of don't know. It's like chocolate covered broccoli, right? They don't know that they're getting something healthy because it tastes good. And so it's a win-win.
All right. I must try chocolate covered broccoli.
I love broccoli and I love chocolate, so it's all good.
I'll see if that will make my daughter try it. What is the mission or the vision of Play to Prevent?
So is to, I think that, we've done a lot of work in schools, particularly Connecticut schools. I'm right in New Haven. I've lived in New Haven for 30 years and have worked a lot with schools and teachers and teenagers in the greater New Haven area, and now are really branching out anywhere from Hartford to Stamford to Old Saybrook. And our goal really is to develop this type of, digital health education tool that, that will provide kids with this information and this skill building. At this point, health education is really pretty, non-standardized. It's not consistent. Kids don't necessarily receive the education they need around these health topics. So our goal was to really create this collection of games that would address the most critical health outcomes in teens. So we're talking mental health, we're talking addiction and substance misuse, we're talking sexual health, we're talking, developing skills around overall sort of self-efficacy and self-advocacy. And so our goal is to really help kids learn how to make better decisions in a virtual world that will translate to the real world and help them live happier and healthier lives.
That's excellent. Yeah, great. I know I have a bunch of video gamers in my house that are now all young adults, but yes.
Mine too. They still are playing games, but yes.
What makes your games different from other video game interventions?
I would say that it comes down to our process. And so from the start with our very first game, which is Play Forward Elm City Stories, which was built really with a huge amount of help from the New Haven community, and New Haven is the Elm City, so hence the shout out to the name of the game. We include our teen partners and key stakeholders from the get-go. So teens are involved with every step of the development of our games. That means artwork, that means voice, that means stories. Everything is collected from them, sent off to our game development team, who then turns it into sort of first drafts that are then brought back to the kids. The kids either say yay or nay, and they're really the ones who help design these games. And then ultimately, once the game is done, we pilot again with teams, and then ultimately evaluate our games, either using kind of the gold standard, which is a randomized controlled trial, or in one case, we did a large field study, but we have them help us evaluate and see what the impact is. And so I think we have been given the gift of time in our funding to be able to take the time. Each of these games takes anywhere between 12 and 18 months to develop, with a lot of iteration, complete involvement with our teen partners. And then we can do sort of the gold standard evaluation and do a large randomized controlled trial. And in one case, we followed kids up to 2 years, but generally we'll follow them for 6 to 12 months to evaluate the impact of our games. So I think we take a very rigorous scientific approach to something that maybe is seen as an unconventional intervention, but we want to be able to develop it in a way that's scientifically rigorous and then evaluate it in that same way.
Wow. Now, you've mentioned, earlier you mentioned you just concluded your 5th game and you were just speaking about the different games that you have. Can you tell us about those games?
Sure. So as I mentioned, the first game was Play Forward Elm City Stories, which really helped us launch the lab, was focused on risk reduction and HIV prevention. That game is our largest game. It has about 16 hours of unique gameplay. On average, kids will play about 10 hours, but it's a big game. And it really helped us develop the processes and methods for how we then develop the rest of our games. Typically, our format is that our games are made up of a number of stories. They're highly story-based. They're kind of graphic novel style in terms of the way they look. Heavy in characters, recurring characters throughout the game. And so there's sort of a series of stories that the player has to navigate through. And with each story, it's connected with typically one of or two of 5 mini games, which are really our skill-based experiences. And those are the parts of the game that teach kids skills in a repetitive and thorough way so that they can then go back into the story unlocked to go on to the next part of the story. So that's kind of the model. From Play Forward, we then received funding to develop Play Test, a lot of plays in here. Play Test is focused on sort of advocacy around their own health, teaching older teens how to be their own agent of change in terms of their own healthcare, with a specific focus on testing for sexually transmitted infections and HIV. And so that game, again, sort of has that same type of format, the same kind of graphic novel design look about it. The next one is Smokescreen. Smokescreen is focused on vaping and smoking prevention. And again, a little bit of choose your own adventure along with challenges, and one of the main issues is not only skill building, but also making sure that teens have the accurate information, right? They can think they know everything, and sometimes they do, but very often it's not quite accurate or quite true. So our goal is to make sure that the information they have is accurate. Then we developed Empower Ed. Empower Ed is a much smaller game, literally under an hour, much more skill building around cognitive reappraisal and sort of helping kids learn how to reframe negative thoughts, sort of, creating sort of a healthier internal environment for themselves. And then the last one is the most recent game, which is Play Smart, which focuses very heavily on mental health promotion and then also on substance use prevention with a major focus on opioid misuse. So, and again, with the same type of structure of, 5 or 6 stories, 5 or 6 mini games, kind of all intertwined. And most games, I mentioned Play Forward is up to 16 hours. Most of the games, except for Empower Ed, are kind of more in the 4 to 8 hour range.
Oh.
Interesting. I'm just thinking of like a parent sticking their head in. You're playing video games. Like, oh, what are you doing?
Well,
Really, this is a good one.
No, and I have to tell you, we've talked with a number of parents, and what we've heard back from them is, can you make a parent version of this so that I can know what my kids may be thinking about or dealing with? I can learn strategies of how to talk to my kids. And the other thing that we've heard from them anecdotally, which I just love, is that their kids will be sitting at the dinner table and will raise discussions about these topics that they would never talk to their parents about, but because they learned it in the game, they feel like it's like, oh, I learned this thing in the game. I had no idea that e-cigarettes actually had dangerous chemicals in them. And the parents would be like, when do you talk to me about vaping? And they've loved it because it's this introduction to these sometimes challenging topics that parents feel like within the context of a video game, it's safe to have those discussions. So that's a huge bonus, I think.
Yes, definitely. How are your games distributed?
So I mentioned at the beginning of my intro that I'm also founder of a new entity, well, newish entity, Playbl. And so especially during the pandemic, we had a huge uptick in demand for our games. I mean, exponential increase. And it made sense. There are a lot of kids at home, parents and teachers needing content. And so, all of our games were being distributed through the lab for free. But as this demand has increased and as there's been a clear need for other technologies, for example, we now have an educator data dashboard that allows educators to see how much their students play a game, what areas of the game they play, replay? Did they complete the game? Those all seem to be very important metrics that educators were looking for. And so we ended up establishing Playbl really as the distribution arm because the lab just could not continue doing all the research as well as keeping up with the demand. So Playbl is solely focused on getting these games into the hands of kids in the most efficient, effective, and sustainable way, and offering now other assets like this dashboard that we've heard educators tell us is hugely valuable to be able to say, now I know what, that my students actually played, and this is how much they played, and those types of data. So Playbl is in full force, and just signed our first customer. And so it's very exciting. It's just it's a lot of work to do, but the lab really could not keep up with, handfuls and handfuls of requests on a daily basis.
Well, congrats on your first signing.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, no, it's, I think there's a huge need, and I think that we can meet that in a way that, that will really benefit, teens and the folks who care for them.
Wow. I feel like we're getting a lot of exclusives. Your first client, everything. A lot of exclusives.
I was thinking how we're trying to get some sound effects worked out, and twice now I would have hit the like shoo.
That's right. The like celebration balloons popping. Yes.
Now, are there like targeted age ranges and things along that nature for your games?
Yeah, so overall we focus on the age group between 10 and 20. So we're really talking kind of early middle school to kind of early college, if you will. And I can tell you, no matter what age group we're in, there's always somebody who says, oh, you need to start so much earlier. So when we, our first game was 11 to 14, and there were teachers who were like, no, you need to start at age 8. So we're trying to expand out our age range. But our first game was 11 to 14. Our second game was sort of more like 10 to 16. Same with the third game. The fourth game is more 14 to 18. And then Play Smart is really more high schoolers. So we kind of have the kind of younger middle school, kind of one that sort of bridges middle and high school, and then the high school games. So something for everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And some of it was a lot of it was very intentional because, if we're talking about opioid misuse, your target might be more of a 16-year-old than an 11-year-old. And so we wanted to make sure that sort of, and based on what we see in terms of the epidemiology and what age groups are most affected by certain health issues, we were pretty intentional in those age groups.
Well thought.
Yeah. And so you must collect some data. I mean, certainly not personal data, but you want to know what kids are up to and how they can be helped. So what kind of data do you collect, and what do you do with it?
Yeah, so, in our evaluation studies, which again, we're embarked on our third randomized control trial, which essentially just means that, we enroll, a group of teens with their consent and their parents' consent, and half are randomized to or assigned to play our game, and half are assigned to play a set of what we call control games, which are really sort of what we call an attention time control, meaning that at the end of this, we can say all kids played a game for this amount of time. So these games are fun games, skill-based games, but have no content relevant to what we're targeting, right? So things like Spell Tower or Angry Birds, or, they can be learning games, but they're just not focused on what we're teaching in our game. So we have done a number of pilot studies. We're doing our third randomized control trial. We've done a large field study, and we basically collect an enormous amount of data from kids as part of these structured evaluations at baseline. So before they play whatever game they're going to be assigned to, and then typically at a number of intervals, 6 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, in one case, 24 months, up to 2 years. And we can then see what the difference is in terms of impact between our control group, who didn't play our game, and the group that did play our game. And that's really how we evaluate the efficacy of our games. We also ask the kids who played our game a number of questions just about their gameplay experience, because we want to hear how they like the game. Would they tell their friends to play the game? Would they play the game again? What did they like? What didn't they like? So that type of user satisfaction data is also critical. So that takes a huge team. We're now, as of right now, a team of working on this PlaySmart randomized control trial. We are a team of 15, all women, working on this working on this randomized control trial to enroll 532 kids in 10 schools around Connecticut. So
now, are there opportunities to expand outside of Connecticut?
Oh, absolutely. So our field study, which was a field study where we enrolled 560 kids to evaluate the smokescreen game, we actually had kids participate from Massachusetts, Rhode Island,
More sound
effects, Arizona, and California. So we also, for PlaySmart, did a virtual sort of pilot study because this was still in the height of the pandemic, where we piloted it with 35 kids from around the country. So the beauty of these types of digital tools is that we don't need to be in the same place. So we can engage kids for the randomized control trial, since it is so much on-site effort. We go to schools. We don't bring kids to us. We go to their school. We bring iPads. We bring headphones. We do it all in their space so that they don't have to move or leave or anything. That really needs to be on site, and right now harder to do going to a different state.
Right. Wow. Now, are there different storylines for each, or is it so it's not?
Every game, every story is different. And this is, again, this process of starting with the kids and asking them, using, sort of novel methods to elicit some of these discussions, because kids, sometimes they will be absolutely fine with telling you exactly what they think. Sometimes it can be crickets, right? So we have developed different strategies. So for example, and I wish I could show you, but we actually had this graphic commissioned by a fabulous graphic artist, where the ask was basically create, a picture, a drawing of teenagers kind of at a party. So it's called the party scene, where there's nothing sort of overtly or explicitly risky going on, but just kids could see something in that picture coming from their own minds, their own perspectives. And so we sat down with a group of 15 kids, gave them a simple drawing, a beautiful drawing, but simple drawing, and said, what do you think is going on here? And the stories that just came out of that picture were so phenomenal and really betrayed what is going on in their worlds around them. So for example, you can see in this image that sort of down the center in the back, you see a little girl looking at her watch. There's like a boy standing next to her looking down at her. And 85% of the girls in this focus group said she had just found out she was pregnant.
Whoa.
And not that we don't think that teen pregnancy is on teenagers' minds, but that was just really okay, that just hearing it from them, and then the discussions that came out of it, all of those types of stories are then built into the game. And so depending on what it is, that game had more of a focus on sexual health. If it's more about vaping and smoking, we hear from kids. With our play test game, which focused in part on HIV testing, we had one teen boy who was just lovely, but said that he would never get HIV tested because he knew that you had to use a needle to test, and you could get HIV, and he knew you could get HIV from using needles. Wow. And that was such an eye-opener, right? It made total sense. I was sitting in the room listening to him and thinking, that totally makes sense, and yet it's so not true. And
right.
You feel for him, like struggling with that. You're telling me I should get tested, but I also know that needles give you HIV. So again, all of these games have different stories really pulled from the input of our teen partners, which is what is absolutely the most important part of what we do, honestly.
Wow.
Greg, what did you think? The young girl looking at her watch.
I was just thinking he was asking, what time this party's over? Or?
There you go.
I was thinking she was like, oh, when is this date going to be over?
Exactly. And that could tell you something totally different. And that may have come up in the conversation too. It just struck us that, most of the girls, this is what it triggered in them. So
I'm still pretty intrigued by the artist who understood what you were looking for, because I was lost.
well, and I think where it came from is that we started looking through like magazines to see if we could find like images, photographs or whatever of teens at a party that wasn't really explicitly risky. And like they're all drinking and they're all,
Right.
and we couldn't find anything. So we actually, this graphic artist who is a friend of somebody in the lab, said they would do this, and it's beautiful. I'll send it to you guys. Yeah, it's a beautiful, it's really just it's a beautiful piece of artwork too. So
that's great. We could use it at our meeting and just, no, totally wrong answer. She's pregnant.
right. It's like me, wrong answer.
New sound effect.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So you had mentioned the dashboard that you have for teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have other supports?
Yeah. So what we've been providing, especially sort of we have this first customer, and now we have 2 or 3 others kind of on the launch pad, is that we're designing sort of question and answer documents, worksheets, discussion guides. Each of the games has a very extensive educator manual that comes with it, which really gives you information about every aspect of the game, so that the educator can kind of read different parts, get oriented to the game. So there's the educator manual, there's the dashboard, there's sort of curricular materials and sort of questions and discussion guides. That's sort of what we have at this point. The dashboard, which we just pretty much finished development of like a month or so ago. We actually did it with Deloitte, and they did an amazing job, because where this dashboard gets its data is that each of the games software produce an enormous amount of what we're calling in-game data, which basically is the data that tells you everything that player did in the game, how long they played, where they played, how long they spent playing certain parts of the game, where they replayed parts of the game. And so we can then shift all that in-game data through the back end of the game to the dashboard. And so the educator, with their, say, cohort of 200 students, can in aggregate say, oh, yes, my students played this many hours, they played this % of each of these mini games, they completed this. This is what the stickiness factor is, which is sort of the, how much kids went back and played again. And what we've heard from educators now is that it's incredibly valuable. For one, it tells them something about what their students are learning, but it also helps them justify to other folks, look, we paid for this and they played. They had the full experience, and that really closes that loop that's very important in terms of, that students actually use these games.
So now, in your opinion, who would you say would be a great candidate or a great partner to offer the video game interventions?
You and your team.
You can repeat that. Sound effect.
That's right. I think right now we've been focusing on schools, because honestly, in the last 2.5 years, we have received thousands of requests from educators for these games. We've given out over 410,000 logins for these games. So, we've sort of been responding to educators. It's also kind of what we're used to in terms of the development and evaluation of our games. So I think, schools are fabulous. I think, school districts, individual schools, educational programs, organizations that are focused on one of these content areas, or prevention overall. Because one thing I can tell you, and we target this in with these games, is that a number of these health outcomes are totally preventable. So, that is where our focus is. And we feel like this is not a specific target group. This is everyone. This is a universal prevention program, prevention and wellness, in fact, because we also focus a lot on sort of positive things like positive mental health or positive advocacy or positive, sort of framing of the way you're thinking about the world. So, so I think, any organization that has, a stake in 10 to 20-year-olds, and that can be clinicians, that can be hospitals, that can be insurance companies, educators, youth organizations. So
in a couple of our communities, we have a diversion program. I couldn't come up with the name until right then. I didn't think I was going to come up with it. Where kids that get caught vaping or with substances in school, instead of becoming suspended or having a traditional detention, go through a program where they actually do an hour-long online course. Do you think your games could be used as, instead of a disciplinary action, kind of a learning tool in replacement?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think that, there's, a role in, and not in any way, honestly, because I don't think kids really view our games this way. I don't think they're viewed as punitive. And obviously those types of programs, you hope that these types of tools wouldn't be thought of being used for punitive purposes. They're engaging, they're educational, they deliver something that I think kids who are at higher risk actually can most benefit from. And that can be risk on any, on the whole spectrum, from sort of contemplating but not yet doing, or perhaps doing already, and being able to sort of see in the game, oh, look, here's somebody in the game who decided to cheat on a test. And this is the series of steps that happen. And that at many different, sort of junctures, you can make, you can cheat, but then down the road, you can make the right decision to talk to your principal about it. And that doesn't, just because you made a first bad decision doesn't mean that you can't make subsequent good decisions that ultimately have an impact. So I think we take a very sort of generous and honest approach that kids are gonna make mistakes and kids are gonna do bad things. And our games just want to sort of show them that at a number of different branching points, you can make a good decision, and that will help even if you made a bad decision to begin with. So I think, yes, I think that these can really teach a lot in terms of helping them understand, like, oh yes, this, character made a bad decision, but then they did something that was the right thing to do, and it actually helped. So maybe that's one of the take homes, is to be open to that.
Wow. Now, with the amount of logins that you've given in, you said over $400,000. I mean, not $400,000. Sorry, over 400,000 logins. Do you have the numbers on like how effective the games are?
So not with, those sort of went out into the wild. We, because again, the data is all collected through the backend system. That data is there. We don't use that data because that's not, that's really much more user engagement data. We really use the opportunity of our clinical trials to demonstrate the efficacy, because that we can demonstrate that kids, at 12 months have improved attitudes, improved knowledge, sense of self-efficacy, intentions, perceptions that are sustained for months and months. And that's our way of really demonstrating efficacy. What we're seeing with some of our teachers who are new customers is that they think we've published over 25 papers, in peer-reviewed journals on our work, including, our clinical trials. But very often they want to see how it works with their kids. And so we're thinking about that as potentially sort of a next stage of the dashboard, is to be able to actually, for a cohort, collect some efficacy data for that cohort, for that educator. Right now, what say this first educator started doing was, and we gave them sort of questions that they could give kind of pre-post to their students to be able to demonstrate efficacy. But that's something we'd like to incorporate, sort of streamline into the dashboard, because educators clearly, they love the published studies. I mean, it's one of our biggest strengths, is that we have all this evidence for how well our games work, but they really also want to see how they work in their kids. which is fair.
Wow. Is there a group? So I'm just thinking about the potential, our listeners and people who are very like interested in it. Is there a minimum or a maximum amount? Like, I don't want to say class size, but for a particular organization or school, do they have to hit a minimum before they can get access to the games? Or
No, they nope. Typically we will, if an educator writes and said, I'm really interested, I have a class of 40 students, I'd really love to use your smokescreen game, but before we purchase it, could you send me like a demo subscription, which is basically just a set of login credentials for them so that they can see it. We also have sort of video demos of each of our games. We have one pagers so that they can sort of just get some information, but sometimes it's really helpful for them to just play the game. But no, if it's 10 students, if it's 10,000 students, we can do either. Like, sizes makes no difference.
all right.
Now, if somebody is listening and totally interested in finding out more information, where should they go?
So, there are a couple of, certainly the Play to Prevent website has a lot of information about our games, and it's playtoprevent.org. Playbl is probably the best place to reach out if they're interested in purchasing any or all of our games. And the best one for that is hello at Playbl, which is PLAYBL.com. And just said, I'm interested in your games and would love to hear more, or whatever they want to write. That's the best contact.
Wow.
Excellent.
Well, I have a gamer at home that once he hears this interview, he's gonna be like, oh, when are we?
That's right. You're on the spot.
Exactly. This has been very, very enlightening. I just love the whole idea of it. I love the focus of the games. I think it hits spot on. I think really, really honing in on risky behaviors as well as mental health and well-being. I think is really, really important right now with our youth.
A lot of much needed topics.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I think to be able to deliver it to them in a way that they don't tune out, they're not staring at the ceiling as people are talking to them. And we've heard this from teachers. They're like, oh my God, once my students get started, they are there. And that's what we want. That's what we want. We want them to get this information in a way that they're open to it and it sticks. So.
Well, I thank you very much for your time, Dr.
Thank you. Thank you both. This was great. I appreciate all the great questions and the discussion.
Thank you. It was so nice to meet you.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.